Welcome to the Indian Film Festival of Cincinnati. Today we're here with our entertainment panel. I'm so glad that all of you have had a chance to watch most of the movies. We just have one movie left tonight, which is our closing film. But right now, we have with us a powerhouse of a panel, and allow me to introduce all of them to you. So first we have Bhavani, who is the founder and co-founder of two organizations, South Asians in Entertainment and South Asian Women in Entertainment. And she has brought to us a fabulous panel so that all of you can enjoy and learn from them. So let me tell you a bit about Bhavani. She has a unique 360-degree content experience in television, production, development, storytelling, and she's done this for more than 20 years. Her company, Bhavani Entertainment, is working on developing, writing, financing, producing some compelling pilots with experienced writers ranging from Breaking Bad and Leverage to new talented voices for all platforms. Under her flagship program, Bhavani Entertainment, she concentrates on stories with captivating character development and story arcs. Currently, she has 25 one-hour dramas and dramedies in development. That's a lot, Bhavani. And has optioned 3 graphic novels. She's also produced 5 short films as well as created a pilot sizzle with Steve Eccleston and Ira Schumann at the museum, The Wedding Singer, Victor Frankenstein, and these are the
We can move on from me. It's a
yes,
really long bio. It's all
yep.
good.
And she co-produced a web pilot directed by Joelle. Now, she was director of programming at Sesame, and she also worked as a digital producer at television.com. And Bhavani has done so many things, and her resume is really extensive. But just to draw on a couple of things, her responsibilities at the first South Asian channel in the U.S. called ITV included content acquisition, programming strategy, and promotions. And her efforts resulted in dramatic 52% increase in viewership in women 18 to 49, children, and seniors. She's a native of New York City, and she currently lives um, in LA. She was the co-chair of the PGA Mentorship Committee, and now she's the founder of the South Asian Women in Entertainment and the co-founder of South Asian in Entertainment and South Asians in sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. So she covers all of it. And I tell you, she is a dynamite. She does amazing work. Guys, follow her organizations. She puts out a lot of material for filmmakers like you, so you can always learn from it. I watch her all the time, and yep, she is dynamite. Welcome, Bhavani.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And she will be moderating today's show. And thank you for collaborating with us. We really appreciate that. And it's our goal
Absolutely.
to bring as much as we can to our filmmakers. So I do appreciate that, Bhavani. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to introduce to you Heath Luman. Heath is one of the industry's most preeminent reality producers with a focus on competition formats and specialism in creating spectacular games and challenges. Now, he's seen the development of challenges on series as varied as The Amazing Race, Big Loser, and Minute to Win It. For the past 8 years, Heath has led the competition department on CBS's Big Brother, responsible for the creation of all competitions for the series, including some classics, I believe. Previously, he has produced and directed multiple competition and game formats for Nickelodeon, Turner, ABC, NBC, NBC, USA, Spike, and Fox. Welcome, Heath. We are so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And now I'm going to introduce to you Simon Taufique. Simon, welcome. Simon is a composer and an Emmy-nominated producer. Born in London of proud South Asian heritage, Simon has become a trusted collaborator for a new generation of filmmakers. He's an Emmy-nominated film producer, an award-winning composer, and a founding partner of the film fund Atomic Features. He's worked with dozens of fast-rising directed talents, such as Anja Markart, Karen Wester, and Spirit Award nominee Hussein Kishawars, also Francisco Ordonez, as well as the iconic directors such as Mary Harron and Julian Casablancas, to just name a few. He has co-composed the score for Jesus Henry Christ, and this starred Michael Sheen, was executive produced by Julia Roberts, and he's done work with Grammy-winning guitar virtuoso David Thorne. So Simon comes to us with a lot of experience behind him, and I believe he even worked with Night Shyamalan very early on, and they worked together on some scores for Shyamalan's films. So welcome, Simon. It's wonderful to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. And next is Meta Valentic. Meta joined producer Sandy Kleiman in entertainment media management just last year. It's a management production company that's dedicated to storytelling from the intelligence services, the cybersecurity world, and military history. As a producer, she helps filmmakers sort of hone their vision and delivers project on time and on budget. She's produced 5 independent feature films, including the critically acclaimed Urbania, which played at Sundance and Toronto Film Festivals and was then released by Lionsgate. Now, Meta was the UPM co-producer of Lionsgate Ladron Ke Roba, a Ladron, Tirabati. It's a Spanish language feature film starring Mexican and Latin America's top telenovela stars. Ladron stands as one of the top grossing Spanish language films in US history. Congratulations and welcome, Meta.
Unmute. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Producer writer Joelle Luman, I want to introduce Joelle to you. She has a background in broadcast journalism. She is a natural storyteller with a great passion for action thrillers, horror, and sci-fi. Her feature script, The Caregiver, helped land her a spot on the 2019 hit list, and she has written 2 feature scripts for Universal Pictures. Prior to becoming a screenwriter, Joelle produced highly rated, unscripted television shows across all networks, including Bravo's Emmy Award-winning series, The Top Chef. Welcome, Joelle.
Hi, thank you.
And let me introduce to you Varun. Varun is originally from Bangalore and currently lives in LA. He moved to LA for film school at AFI, and he works as an editor and a writer as well. He's currently working on TV comedies for the last few years, but he has also edited feature films, web series, short commercials, music videos, all of it. And his notable TV credits are What We Do in the Shadows on FX, for example, Trial and Error on NBC, Manic on HBO, which is a pilot, I'm Not Okay with This on Netflix. A lot of film credits as well, Atomic Blonde as assistant director, Miss India America, directed by Ravi Kapoor, Ava's Impossible Things, The Insomniac, and so on. He has worked in digital web series before moving to film and TV, and was one of the first editors hired at the YouTube channel Awesomeness TV. And he has edited many web series and pilots for Issa Rae's company. He's also been a consulting editor on movies from South India in Kannada called Godi Banna, Sadharna, Maikatu, and Kavuladari. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I am so glad that all of you are here with us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here to talk to the filmmakers and to listen to what their questions are. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let Bhavani start with the first question and begin to moderate the whole discussion. And Bhavani, I can help you. I can send some questions over to you as they come in, and we can take it from there, right?
What we'll do is I'll go through a pattern of questions, and then at the end we'll go ahead and open up for Q&A. So, and then at that point you can send me all the questions. Thank you
Lovely.
so much, Rati.
Lovely, absolutely. So the audience knows the format now. Bhavani is going to garner responses from the entire panel and then open it up to questions from all of you. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Guys, we're going to open up the first question with COVID. And I'm actually going to start with, you guys saw me kind of pop off screen for a second. This is the reality of my COVID is I'm a caregiver for my mom. So I sometimes have to pop off just because there isn't another human being because of COVID. Sometimes we do have a caregiver. Unfortunately, at early hours, we don't. But COVID has affected not only our professional lives, but also our personal lives. And they've all become blended into one big, experience right now. So I'm going to start off with Heath, because Heath, you're back in production and you're in reality, which is a lot of interpersonal space, people are in each other's space. How has the reality industry been hit? How have you personally been dealing with it on shows like Big Brother and Amazing Race and everything else? So I'm going to just let you go ahead and start off.
Sure. So I my only experience producing in COVID so far is Big Brother. We were one of the first to get back up and running. And then for those of you not familiar with the format of Big Brother, it's basically a bunch of people move into a house. It's a unique situation for COVID in that there's much less interaction between the cast and the producers and the crew. On Big Brother, we shoot primarily through RoboCams that are fixed. And we also have a lot of the two-way mirrors where on the one side of the mirror, it's dark and there's camera operators wearing all black that can shoot through the mirrors into the house that's more lit. So the house guest experience is they just see their reflection. And kind of like the cop investigative, detective TV shows on the other side, there are people watching. So that, and even the interviews and things. So on most shows, you got camera guys running the house. We don't do that on Big Brother. You have, producers talking directly. We don't do that on Big Brother. I talk to the house guests. I have a headset and I have this giant control panel where I can route my voice into different rooms in the house. And that goes for interviews too. On the story team, they'll have the person in the diary room. But that house guest doesn't actually see the producer. They just hear their voice on a speaker. So we were, I think uniquely positioned to have a little bit of a better chance than a lot of these other shows that you see where people are all just kind of running around. So, obviously there was COVID testing with the cast before they went in. I believe there were 3 different kind of benchmark tests, before they came into a sequester. We put them away for like 14 days, a midway test, and then a final test before they moved in the house. But we sort of treated them as a separate entity because once they were in, they were pretty much sheltering in place. We were all just watching, right? And so then it became the bigger challenge was our crew. So we have a staff and crew of around 300 people. So you can imagine that's a lot of people to manage. And unlike NBA, where everybody's sort of in this bubble, we were not in a bubble. All of those crew people are going home. They're going to families, like you said. They're going to the grocery store, the gas station, whatever. So that was, I think, kind of the scary part about it. But fortunately, we just shot our finale. We just finished the whole season and shot for about 3 months straight, 24/7, and was able to pull it off. I'm not sure how much time you want for this question.
No.
How much detail you want me to provide or any?
One more piece of detail that I do want to provide is let's talk about the budgets, because a lot of people have been talking about how the budgets have increased with all the COVID regulations. And let's also just talk about zones really quick, because that is something that is very new. And if you're not literally working in it, it's not something that a lot of people know about. So go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So I think some general things, and again, reality I know is different. A lot of the filmmakers here have a different type of. But I could talk a little bit about our experience, and I think you'll be able to get some insight on some things that do translate over. So one thing you talked about in terms of budget, without revealing too much of all the nitty gritty, I can tell you the testing. Our staff that I mentioned, everyone was getting weekly tests. Those tests cost about $150 per person.
Wow.
So you can imagine 150 per person once a week for the whole cycle. We had a system where, there was a lot of back and forth in the beginning. This was all new, right? We were one of the first ones going back into production. So part of what we did was we took the recommendations from IATSE, from all the different unions, which by the way, didn't always line up. They had different things. So we had to sort of negotiate with each union before we could even bring people back to work. But what we ended up doing was creating like a pod system is what we called it. And the idea was that we would have no more than 30 people in a pod. So for what I do, the challenge, my main focus is producing these challenges. And so what we did was basically divide it up and had different pods of people where I'd have like a production designer, an art director, a producer, a segment producer. They had a smaller scale team of construction, scenic, painters, set dressers, but it was kind of a smaller team. And that group would sort of work together, test the games, install. But then when we're installing a game in the yard, it's not just setting up the set pieces or the pads or whatever, but now we got other departments, right? Like engineering might have to come in because we might have some video screens that players are looking to get questions off of, for example, or audio. The house guests would mic themselves with their lavs. They were trained on that before moving in. But audio would oftentimes rig mics in the yard. So we had to do this pod thing where everybody would kind of have a colored lanyard. We had safety personnel watching to make sure that only, big sign up, pod A only allowed in the yard, or engineering only, or whatever. And there were safety personnel that would sort of check the lanyards. There were some people that had, like myself, kind of the rainbow badge, where I was a cross pollinator. There was a handful of people that were allowed to kind of shift between groups.
But I'm guessing they're a very small group.
That's correct. There's a small group, and that's true. But yeah, so the idea was creating these pods. A lot of it was to limit interaction, obviously. Of course, we had all the standard things like 6 feet apart or more, always wearing masks. A lot of the infrastructure, like the offices, we had to find more office space because our old way, we'd have, a bunch of people kind of crammed up, on each other. So we had to sometimes cut staff, sometimes spread them out and get new office space. A lot of the places had the plexi walls, like I talked about the RoboCams, but there's people operating those, right? So in the control room, we had to pretty much reimagine some of the control room and the master control spaces, spread people out, put up the plexi, they're wearing the masks, they're getting tested once a week. And then if anybody got a positive test, they were removed. And then anyone in their pod would go into a daily testing protocol.
Oh, wow. So you didn't shut down. We
did not shut down. We would do contact tracing, remove, and then monitor. And fortunately, we never had any massive outbreaks. We had early on in the season, we had some false positive tests that ended up being a good thing for us because it put the fear in everyone of like, oh, wow. And suddenly you realize, like, when you contact trace, we had a couple people that had made mistakes. There's, we're all human, right? We're all, and as you guys know, from watching the different news sources, there's a lot of people that have different opinions, and a lot of people on the crew and staff have different opinions, right? So we found very early on, thankfully, because of that false positive, we started contact tracing. We realized like, oh, we have there was a couple spots where we're like, oh, we need to improve in terms of making sure everybody knows, okay, right now only this group is allowed to be setting up. Right. Okay, only once they're gone. Okay, now the next group, and so on. And then after all that, there's a company, Belfor was the company that we used, BELFOR, that basically has the Ghostbuster packs, and they come in all, with the suits on, and they spray before the house guests would come into an environment. So there's a number of procedures, but in terms of the budget, obviously there's testing, there's this extra expenditure for the fogging, the spaces. And then I think people's workflow and communication, suddenly it's a lot of Zoom meetings, it's a lot of work from home when possible. It's these longer, more sequential load-ins of different departments of only certain pods. But it was, I think, looking back on it, I think we learned a lot from it. And in some ways, it forced people to be more accountable, and it forced us to be a little more efficient and communicate interdepartments. prior to this, a lot of times it was sort of like all hands on deck. And
Right.
sometimes when I'm setting up a game, I would have people kind of, like the electronics guy be running a wire, putting something over. And it was so much going on that like suddenly a construction guy would sink a screw through the electronics and now the button's not working. And it was like, oh, what's that? So I think in some ways, some of those little hiccups and mistakes from everybody just kind of doing everything at once, I
Everyone
felt like
being
it was,
piled on.
it
Yeah.
forced us to communicate and to limit the number of people and to be a little more systematic and efficient with our load in. So, I think we learned a lot, and I hope there's some we'll take away with some of these techniques and improved communications and stuff like that.
Thank you so much, Heath. That is all of the information you gave will really help people moving forward, because you guys were first in line when it came to getting into, production with COVID. Next up, Simon. Simon, talk to us about what's been going on with your projects and how it's been working through this COVID period.
Well, it feels a lot like deja vu, because when I was producing Imperium and also a little bit of She's Lost Control, I had become a new dad. And so I was, my memories of that time were of having meetings, virtual meetings, because, for the first year or so, I was home. And so I would be on multi-hour conference calls with London, with LA. And so I'm on headsets. This is pre-Zoom. So these were conference calls, and I have a baby sleeping on my chest for hours at a time. He got used to my voice, and I got used to doing multiple things. I got used to holding a baby and being on, using the computer with the other hand. So you become an ambidextrous person. So in that way, juggling multiple things at the same time, now I think back to that, and I'm glad I went through that as a working dad. And we did a lot of trading off, my wife and I, because her job required her to be at work sooner than what we thought it was going to require, and we just hit the ground running and made do. And so now we're in that phase again. So it doesn't feel entirely alien. So for those new parents or recently new parents, I think this is not an entirely new experience. So while it's been a little bit of a shock, it's not a surprise.
Thank you.
So so I think we're willing to roll up our sleeves and do what it takes. But that's also what I've been telling my students in my producing classes. So I teach producing at NYU, and one of the classes was in the midst of when the pandemic hit. And so we were ending the course, and these students they had that situation where the first half of the course was in person and the second half was over Zoom. And we're trying to wrap up, what this experience was like. And I really thought that this is really what producing is about. Yeah. It's being thrown into the deep end, and no one gives you an instruction on how to make it into safe water, into shallow territory. But your job is to figure out how to do that. Number one is figure out how to get yourself safe, but you're also a leader for all these other people, for the crew, for the investors, for the studio. And so not only do you get yourself into a safe place, but you're also intended and expected to show others how to get to safety as well. And so what that does is it forces you to become a calmer and more measured person rather than freaking out. Even though you might be freaking out inside, what this entire experience has reminded me is that no, you can't really let on how debilitating or how frightening this is, because there are a lot of people relying on you. And as a producer, that's one of the main challenges, and one of the main expectations is that you're going to provide a solution, even when you don't know that there is a solution to be had. Part of your job is to figure that out and feel confident that there is going to be a way through this fire. You are going to be able to find a path, and while you might get singed a little bit, and some people may end up with new hairstyles if their hair catches on fire, by the end of it, everyone's going to be okay. And you're so So that's what the experience has been like going through this. So and being in New York and going through the first phase and a pretty frightening one has been about focus. How do you focus on what you're doing while it feels like the world is crumbling around you? And part of it has been to just be confident and to be present about what you're working on. And so when it comes to development, when it comes to projects that are still ongoing, it's knowing that we still have a job to do. We still have a delivery date. We still have investors who expect a return on the money that they've given you. I still have students that expect me to teach to them on time and hold them accountable. So none of that goes away. It's just you've got another layer of expectation on top of that. But pretty soon, just like I'm back in the gym and working out with a mask the first couple of weeks, I didn't know how I was going to make it through breathing with a mask on and in that kind of environment. And now it's second nature. So you do acclimate to this new reality of an extra weight on your shoulders.
Simon,
So yeah.
You and Heath actually really have talked about producing. I mean, you guys have really covered what it means, which is the cool under fire. So I'm actually going to jump to another question. I'm going to jump to Joelle. Joelle, I'm going to actually talk to you both about writing, but let's talk about the Universal Writers Program because Joelle and I know each other through the Producers Guild, and she's also a producer. She's an amazing producer, but you made that transition in your career. You went from being a producer to becoming a phenomenal writer in your first iteration. No, seriously, you got into the Universal Writers Program, which has thousands of applications and only takes 10 students.
6, actually.
6, even less. So let's talk about that program, but let's also talk about that transition from being, because producer mindset and writer mindset, completely different mindsets. But first, tell us about the Universal Writer Program so people who might want to apply can also understand the program.
Yeah, so Universal, it's a feature writing program, and it's through Universal, but focus and all the Universal properties. So it's Focus Features, Universal, and now because they're with NBC, they also can connect you to executives in television. So it's actually great because you come in as a feature writer, but once you're through the program, they have put me up on meetings with all the TV execs too, in addition to all of the producers and studio execs at Universal, and all the producers with deals at Universal and Focus Features.
Not every program does this, right?
Right, and they paid me to write 2 features. So I worked directly with one of the production companies, Channing Tatum's company, to develop my projects, and then I, worked with Jay Polidoro, who oversees the, Fast and Furious franchise. So one of the execs there, and he and I worked directly together to develop my 2 scripts. So they currently own that. I don't know what's going to happen with it. We'll see. But I got out of the program last year. So it's only been a year. But what it is it's a way for them to, the whole process. I mean, I went through a very extensive process to get in. I had to submit a feature. I also had to submit a treatment for another feature. And then I had to do several essay questions. And it took me several days to complete this application. And then on top of it, there was a phone interview. And then on top of it, I had to go in and I had to go to a reception with all the Universal Focus Features and all the execs and producers at Universal, and introduce myself and make myself stand out. So it was 17 finalists, and we all had to go and make an impression. And so I, for instance, I saw Donna Langley, and I went up to her and said, introduced myself and told her about myself and said, hey, I think you guys need more Asian American programming. And she said, yeah, that's why you're here. And I thought, okay, that's cool. Does that mean I got in? But, at that time I didn't know. So I thought I either got in or she hates me. But anyway, I ended up getting in, which was great. So if she doesn't hate me, and she really means it.
I'm going to stop you, Joelle, really quick. This is something I want the people listening to really take away. What Joelle did was she had an opportunity. She was in the room. She walked up to the person. She had the conversation. David had a question about how do we connect to producers as actors. One of the big things is being in the right place at the right time. A lot of it is absolutely finding out all the events, especially in Zoom. There are so many events going on in Zoom, making sure that you not only go to the event, but then follow up. Joelle's actually really great about that. I'm going to let her continue talking about it.
Right. And that's the thing with that. The thing is, I was a finalist at the time, and I thought, I'm here with all these, I was meeting other writers who were like, I was on the blacklist. I'm rep by CAA. And I was like, I'll never get in. Right. And so I was like, this might be my only chance to ever talk to Donna Langley. So I was like, hey, Donna, let me tell you about myself. I happen to work for my mom. I used to work for my mom, who's an arms dealer. And now I'm a producer, and now a writer. And she was like, oh, interesting. So like that was in 2 minutes, I basically, or less than that, I basically told her everything about me and what I think they need to do at Universal. Because I was like, at the very least, I should tell her you need more Asian American programming. And if they send me away, at least it's in her head. But yeah, it's really just using that 1 minute or 2 minutes that you have with that producer to make yourself stand out and memorable. And it worked, because then I ended up getting the call to come back in, and then I had to pitch one of my projects for 5 minutes in front of a room full of execs, which was a whole nother process. And then that's how I got in. And yeah, it was a great experience, and that opened up a lot of doors. So that's how I got my manager. That's how I get a lot of my meetings now. And I have an open door policy with Universal and Focus. So once I have the right project, I can always come back. But I'm also, being not just a writer, but a producer, I'm very particular about when I come to people. So I don't just go, okay, here are 5 projects I have. Like, I wait till I have the right one to go to them and say, this is the one that you guys should take on.
That's a huge takeaway for everybody listening. Don't just go into a room when you've gotten the opportunity and throw everything at the door, everything at the wall for these people. What Joelle said is very true, which is make sure you're giving them the right project. Joelle, we'll come back to you to talk about the producer stuff. Let me go to Varun really quick. Varun, let's talk about, you've been an editor both in television and film. You have a captive audience of a lot of first-time filmmakers, sometimes second-time, but people who want to both break into TV and into film. What are some of the key first of all, let's talk about the differences between television editing and film editing. Well, what are the pieces of advice that you'd like to tell filmmakers before they come into your post room, before they come into your edit bay?
I'll start with talking about TV versus film really quick, because it is a matter of schedules and timing mostly, right? Because in features, like you tend to have more time. Again, obviously, all of this is depending on budget, but I'm talking about like what you would find in a mid-level feature that's like a $10 million feature or something, or where you have more time, and there are and then you spend a longer time on a director's cut, which is like 4 months at least by DGA standards, and then you do, like, depending on which studio you're working with, like it depends on you might go into test screenings and focus groups. You might do it multiple times. And you'd screen a lot for, like, you'd screen for a lot more people before it actually comes out. Like, it screens to sales agents, it screens to like all kinds of people, right? So there's a longer process, and you tend to like kind of dig in more during all these processes to like really make the film stand by itself. In TV, like the pilots tend, like when it's just a pilot project, then that tends to have a little bit more of that time of like saying, okay, you're going to take a while, like there's going to be multiple rounds of screenings, like targeted screenings, whether it's like a friends and family screenings or it's screening to agents or whatever. But then once you go into series, like there is a very tight schedule of like, okay, we're chasing air dates, or we're chasing dates that release dates for like streaming platforms, and like you, especially for editors, where like, okay, you have to finish on a half-hour comedy, like you usually have 2 editors working on it, so you kind of taking alternate episodes. So like while one is shooting, you're cutting that, and you're doing your director's cut, and by the time your director's cut is done, your next episode's already shooting. So then you have to work on the scenes of that episode while you're waiting for the execs and the producers in the studio to like give notes on your first episode. So you're right, kind of always under the gun.
Right.
But there's always a deadline. So things tend to not kind of just go off the rails, and like kind of especially with like my experience in indie film is that it kind of just trails off in the end because you just haven't quite made up your decisions yet.
Right.
It's like and many a time if it's one of the filmmakers' early films, right? It means everything to them, and they like really want to get it super perfect, right? But then like the what I've realized is like you can get a film to like a 95% pretty quick in post-production. I mean, you can get it to 95% in a reasonable amount of time, but that getting from 95% to what in the director's mind is 100% can take you months to a year, but the audience may not actually see that much of a difference in that, right? So I think it's, for me, like my advice to early filmmakers, like if they're in their early projects and they're doing indie film, I would say like don't sweat the last like 3 to 5%, because like being able to keep yourself on schedule and keep the people that you've hired working with you and keep the energy going and keep the momentum going so the actors are still on board when they have to go to film festivals, all of that. I think all of that contributes so much more to the momentum of a film doing well in the film festival circuit than like you as an early, like a first or second feature director being like, I've got to get that last 5% exactly right, you know?
Right.
So I and of course, like at least in my experience and from everybody else that I hear, like post-production is something that from a budgetary perspective gets into producers' minds much later, gets into directors' minds much later. And you're always like, okay, we'll figure it out. And then in the end, the post budgets are always slim, they're always tight. And you won't be able to pay like an editor a weekly rate. Like you end up saying, okay, I only have $20,000 for editorial, figure it out. So then like all your choices get so much more constrained when you haven't thought about post-production from a budgeting and just a timeline and time frame perspective. So those are the things that I encourage people to think about.
Just because I want people to really hear this one. This is a big one. There is this bad habit, especially with, first-time filmmakers, where it's like, oh, let me just cut it and I'll figure it out later. Like you just said, lock your post budget. Keep it locked and trim from other places if you have to, but then also realize, why am I trimming? There is a reason you're trimming. Something's gone wrong. Take a moment, take a breath, assess what is happening. And then, but that post budget, I so agree with you, Varun, because there's so much of the storytelling that happens in post. It's literally the third eye, which is what I've always called post-production. The third eye, it's the last hand that touches it. That budget should be locked. So that's a great piece of advice that I hope everyone takes away. Go ahead, Varun. So sorry.
So my experience with being on the receiving end of like, there's not enough money for you to do whatever, has been that, because then as an editor, I'm forced to think, okay, I can't pay my bills based on the $20,000 you paid me for now what's turned out to be 6 months of work. If I have to do 3 more months of work on this indie film, which I love too, because we've bought into the idea, we spent this 4 to 5 months in a room with a director who wrote it, it's their baby, like we know intimately what's on their mind. So we're in it as well, but you can't really sustain. And then at that point of time, like for me as an editor, like I'm like, oh, maybe I should take that commercial. I'm going to put this on hold for a week. I'm going to go, I got this like TV for a month, so I'm going to go do that. And then that ends up breaking up this process with the director even more, right? And I feel like that ends up hurting the film a lot more than like trying to achieve that the last little, you've already gone 1,000, like in a 1,000-mile journey, you've gone to 999, but you're slogging through that last mile is going to hurt you more or hurt your film more. Like it might not be the best for your pride, but it's going to definitely hurt your film is what I've seen from my experience.
Thank you, Varun. That was great. And guys, that was a really key piece of takeaway advice from both all these amazing panelists. But one of them is please make sure, I mean, first time producers, the biggest thing that we kind of go loosey-goosey about is budget. That is someplace you really have to concentrate and go, I am the producer. I'm not just the writer and the director, but I am the producer and I had to take this responsibility, because what Varun said was very true. Other people's livelihoods are on the line. You know, it's the same thing with actors. You know, you can't pay you can't pay your rent and experience. Maida, we're gonna throw to you right now. By the way, guys, so one of you guys asked about how to ask to meet producers and stuff like that. I did mention, and Joelle actually put up some great advice. There are great showcases that you can apply to be part of. But I met everyone here through various networking situations. So I think that one of the key takeaways that I want you to have from this panel is networking is such a foundation of our industry. Maida is also a good friend, as is Joelle and everybody else on this panel. But Maida and I were all met each other through the Producers Guild. She also is in the DGA, which is a very, it's unique. It's not, you know, not everybody is in every single guild. Maida, can you walk us through your transition from, and then you can keep it, you know, short and quick, but I do want to talk about, you're a director, you're a producer, now you're development. And a lot of people will have projects, you know, in the audience who want to get into development. Talk about the process of development, but talk about how being a director and producer has informed your process of development.
Yeah, I started as an assistant director through the DGA training program, which is a long established way to get folks into the industry as assistant directors. And you come up on the set, so you're really involved in production from the filming standpoint. And from there, I wanted to be on the creation side a little bit more. So I sort of segued into producing using the skills I had learned as a person who knew how to run a set or make a budget or, you know, do all the logistical aspects of filming into sort of adding on the creative aspect earlier on in the process. So I was doing that independently through independent film, and I loved independent film. It is a incredibly creative and collaborative place, but it's also a place where you'll go broke slowly if you don't evolve. And the pipeline is just, it's challenging. So what I always had was one foot in assistant directing, because that's a great way to, as a union member, make a living and have healthcare and get a paycheck. And then doing the more creatively fulfilling smaller projects that maybe it was, I don't know, just didn't pay. But as my career progressed, I was able to sort of marry the two, in that I ultimately found a job for a producer organizing his development slate, and he's paying me to do that. And so that took a lot of twists and turns. You know, my path was very, it was very odd. But I've landed here and it's been very fulfilling so far.
So talk about development. Like, I think a lot of these guys, most of them will have projects that are not just features. They want to get in, I mean, and some of them will be features, but they want to get into the upper echelons of all of this. Talk to us about what you're going through developing these projects, what it takes to put all the pieces together.
Yeah, and what I find is it's the focus of it. I think one of the other panelists and you, Bhavani, said, you know, just sort of throw it up against the wall and see what sticks. You know, do research about what your project is about, because if you try to pitch a comedy to a producer that's only doing dramas, the producer's just is not only not going to know what to do with your project, they'll think you hadn't done your research into who they are and what they're doing. And that applies to either a producer or a production company or, you know, an agent, a manager. Try and find out what they specialize in and really go for what they're looking to do. So, you know, our company really, it has some variation, but the company that I'm with right now really is focusing on spycraft and sort of the larger umbrella of intelligence services, military, things like that. we are also doing that from the perspective of partnering with people who have just come out of those services, have recently retired from those services, so that we can develop their ideas, their lives that they led, or the things that they know about. And then we pair that idea with a writer. So we're slightly different in our development process, because a lot of other companies will just want to find a script or have a different internal idea that they're trying to pair with a writer. That's kind of our
and you own the IP
thing.
in a very different way at that point.
Right. So, so for me, it's a pretty narrow target for what I'm looking for, and that helps a lot, because you then know what type of writer you were looking for. You know, we have sort of this target of stories that we bring into the company, and then also, one thing to really realize is scale of a company. You know, we are, my particular company is me and then one person that sort of splits her time between the producer's other business, which is sort of this international consulting thing that he does, and my boss, the producer. There's three of us, and I have an intern. You know, so I have a reading list of about 50 things that people have sent to me, and I do the best I can, but I am, you know, one person who can only do so much. So you just also know that when you're talking to other companies, you know, sort of what's their volume. That helps to.
But I think also it's a great takeaway, Maida. Do not email the production company or the producer or whoever within a week and go, did you read it? Did you read it? Do you like it? Do you like it? And I'm being silly about it, but the problem is that if you do that enough times, if you send that email way too much, you're going lower on the list. And I know that sounds horrible, but you have to be patient. This is a long game. If you've sent a script to Maida's company, she has it on the list. And if she will have acknowledged you, we have it, thank you so much. You know, of course, you have to be invited to send the script to Maida's company. But at that point, checking in 3-4 weeks, going, hey, just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. And that's the check-in, not, hey, have you read my script? You know?
Yeah, we call it at the Producers Guild mentoring program, we call it politely persistent. And so yeah, every 3-ish weeks or something, you know, maybe. And I tell people right off the bat that it's going to take me a long time. And so I put that expectation out there. I actually don't mind getting a reminder, because I then know that they're still invested, you know, in wanting me to do this. And so I do actually respond a little bit more to reminders, but some people do not.
Right. And that's it. Know the room. So thank you, Maida. That was wonderful. We'll jump back. Simon, I want to talk about film funding, because that is important to this audience especially. Let us talk about, what does it really mean? You work with Atomic Features, correct?
Yeah.
Talk to us about the realities of film funding. What does it mean? What is the process?
Well, what we realized when we put Atomic Features together was that every time we were trying to fund a project, we were starting from scratch, or it felt like that, where you're going back to your investor pool and you're making the same case again. And along the way, I met with one of our investors who works at a hedge fund, and we talked about what that model looked like and how different it was from a traditional equity model and capital markets model, where they're looking more at a slate of or a portfolio of projects. And so that's what we realized was maybe a bit more attractive to a lot of the investors that we were talking to in New York and in LA, where they're comparing investing in film to investing in the capital markets. So it was trying to leverage things like economies of scale and looking at projects as you group them together. And you're looking at how these projects pair themselves together in terms of directors, in terms of genre, and investors were looking at hedging their bets. So if for every 5 projects that they invested in, 1 would succeed. And it allowed them a cushion, especially in indie film where most films don't make any money. So it was a realistic assessment of, we're not putting all our eggs in this one basket of this one film, and we're just raising unrealistic expectations that it's going to do well because you're so dependent on the film festivals, and then distributors and buyers responding to it in that film festival market. And now that we're in a COVID environment where festivals are taking their influence is shifting, because you don't have the spotlight of the premieres, and you don't have the indie press or the film press responding to an audience and the buzz of that and trying to discover this new talent. I think the investors that we're looking at are more focused, even more so, on things like cast, and things like genre, and also this idea of packaging. Not only what's the package in the film, but what's the package of films that you've put together, so that we can look at this in totality. And we took a lot from the Blumhouse model of picking a genre and then trying to hack it and trying to maximize and leverage what it's really good at, and also minimizing those things that you don't necessarily need in this genre, like cast. You don't necessarily need names when you're in the horror genre, and most of your actors or characters, not actors, but your characters are killed off along the way, and you're not relying as much on name value, but you're relying on the story or the execution, and so the director's vision. And so things like that allow you to save money, and you're not spending as much on your casting, and focusing a lot on a lot of the other elements of that production. So we started looking at those kinds of models of how can we go to an investor and not look at it as, oh, we're back again with another film, and I know the last film was supposed to make money, but it didn't. So, but this one's going to be different. They're smarter than that. So I think they want to see how you are thinking about the realities of the market and able to tap into what these people are looking to get out of an investment. So one of the first things I ask an investor is, why do you want to invest in film? And try to meet their expectations, because sometimes they're just looking for a return. And if they're just looking for a return, I will let them know, well, then you should stick to what you're doing, because if you're an accredited investor, you obviously know how to make money. And that is probably going to, if you put that money where you are right now, you'll likely do better than what you would do if you went into such a high risk venture as film, even though film is non-correlative. So it's not correlated to the economy. And so when we do see things happening in the economy that on the downside, film tends to do better, or it's not tied to the outcomes of the economy. However, in COVID, now that we've got theaters and chains going under, it's changing the entire ecosystem. So I do try to find out why an investor wants to get involved in this. For some, it is they want to tell a story that is tied to their personal story. For some, they want to be a part of the creative process. For others, they want the glamour and the sizzle, less so than the steak. And so this tells me what kinds of films I should be pitching to them, what my approach to pitching those films should be. Do they expect to have big names in it? Do they expect to have a story that speaks to a social cause or a social mission? Or do they just want to show up at the premiere and get to shake hands with the stars of the film, or see the fans waiting in line when we get to that point again, when those things can be possible? So I need to know that before I go in, because I need to know how to deliver on their expectations. This is just like when you're making a film or a TV show. Know who your audience is and know what they want. And just like that, this is your audience. So figuring out what they want is critical so that you can position your films. As any producer will tell you, you've got more films than you have funding for. And so when you do meet people who have funding, package the right ones for them. And sometimes you may not have it. And you can, and I would say, I don't have what it is that you're looking for. I have this, but
Right.
that's not what I think you want, because the worst case scenario is that you have somebody who has money to invest, they want to get involved in this, and you give them an opportunity that is not suited for them. Either it's not going to make the kind of money that they expect, or it's not the kind of storytelling that they are thinking about, and you sacrifice what should be a long-term relationship. And you really do need to look at this as the potential long-term marriage where it continues to provide dividends. You're creating these small families of films together, and you have to raise them and maintain them together. And you hope that they will spawn additional families, and there will be a lot more success that comes out of it. But you can't do that if you go in expect it when they are looking for one kind of experience, and you give them something else, and thinking quite incorrectly that you will be able to bring them along once
Right.
it's done. I mean, I think that's a bait and switch that rarely ever works in your favor.
So
Simon, you brought up something that everybody has touched upon in some way, which is expectation. You know, um, setting the expectation on all sides of the table. You know, understanding that it's a long game that you're getting into with an investor if you don't have the right project. Joelle, it's the expectation of, I'm in the room, I've got to get, I got to make sure that everybody, I meet everybody, I meet their expectation by being on point and ready. Varun, the expectation of an actual budget in which I can both afford a living, but also can give you a project, at the end that is amazing. Maida, in your extent, it's my production company does this. Don't come to me with a musical comedy. There are these expectations, and with you, Heath, it was the expectation of shit is going to be on fire, and you have to be the calm center of the storm. I'm going to actually jump to Heath, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Heath, one of the things that we didn't mention about you was that you actually did sell a show to Quibi, and that is amazing. So congratulations. You're a creator and executive producer of Floored. Tell us a little bit about this show. But there was a question about streamers. So let's talk about the process of going in and selling a show.
Yeah, so look, Quibi, as we all know, is closing up shops, and not a little bit of a blemish there, but it was a show I was really proud of. I did have another company that I partnered with on that one, because a lot of times, like everybody's been talking about, it's about networking and connections. Obviously have a lot of good relationships with different people at different networks and so on. But I partnered up with this company called Mission Control Media. They created Sci-Fi's Face Off. It's a makeup competition show. They created that, and Celebrity Game Night, or Hollywood. There's a few different ones, but the Jane Lynch one for NBC.
Right.
Anyhow, a company with a much larger track record of selling and producing shows. So I had worked with them years ago, had a comfortable relationship. We partnered up, co-developed this show, and the idea was basically a dance competition show. But my sort of twist on it was that the dance floor dances. So it's these crews coming on to this dance floor that's on this giant gimbal that can move, tilt, and it's all programmed to the music. So it's
Oh, wow.
choreographed to the music. So the idea is they come on, they get a sort of experience, they get the funny, the reactions, and then sort of the challenge or game for them to figure out how are we going to redesign our dance routine to work with this new dance partner that we didn't ask for. So that was the idea. So it was kind of trying to capture a little bit of the reality and sort of the thinking and the personalities of them, trying to overcome this obstacle, as well as then the actual art form and showing off the talent and all that kind of stuff. So anyhow, these short form little nuggets. But in terms of the pitch process, I mean, it's like a lot of things. You go in with obviously the relationships, but you create a pitch deck. We also made a little animated, and again, I think it kind of like you were talking about expectations and specifics, right? So different shows, you're going to have different materials. For ours, it's sort of this, obviously an unscripted. We had a little bit of the comedy at the time of pitching it. we didn't have this dance floor built yet. It was kind of like, hey, trust me, here's my resume of all the crazy stuff that I've built and created. Like, you can trust that your money, I can deliver this. But to sell the concept, we did like this little cheap sort of animated kind of a South Park kind of looking animation to sort of show. And it's funny how far that goes in create, I think so many people, they like the visuals and even the, I believe a lot in sort of like the subconscious as well. So I think a lot of people, they're getting, you got to put yourself in their shoes, right? They're getting all these pitches like throughout the day. So what's going to cut through, what's going to be different? And for me, it's like the emotional response. So whether it's like some of the other, folks were talking about, like maybe a more narrative or a basic piece about justice or whatever. For us, it was like make you laugh, right? Comedy, but it was also like the art form. So trying to kind of do that with this animated thing, I think there becomes almost like a visceral response or an emotional response that you have that just sort of feels good, and maybe you don't really know why, but like, I like that. Yeah. So I think that's a big part of it, is thinking about what visuals, also thinking about the time that you have with these people, and how, and practicing the pitch, right? And kind of honing it.
I'm going to stop you right
Go ahead.
now. This is one big thing that I want everyone to take away, because I get a lot of resistance from various different people. Well, we'll just wing it in the room. Don't wing it in the room. There is no winging in the room. This is what happens. One person continues to talk, and the other people, 3 people you're like, why are you even here? You haven't said a word for 5 minutes now. Secondly, the other thing that Heath said that I really want you guys to remember is visuals. If you can't afford like the animatronic, like the animation or something, sketch it out. There are services like Fiverr and all these other services where you can hire an artist for a reasonable rate and have them bring some of your vision to life. A lot of executives don't read anymore. That sounds horrible, but it's the truth. But it's also, look, the truth of it also is they've seen 100 pitches possibly that day or that week. What makes you stand out? What Heath did was he took a sizzle that they hadn't built the machine, but he bought the idea of what it was going to be, and they bought that. And they bought Heath too, let's be honest. They bought his background, they bought the visual, and they bought a solid idea. So that is a big takeaway that I hope everyone is writing down, because that's something, and what Simon said also, which is the money part of it. That's a huge part where it's like, what is the expectation? If you're going into somebody who wants their daughter in the film as the main role, know that going in, because that has happened a lot of times, or they, whatever it may be, have realistic expectations. Heath, go on. Sorry, I just wanted, that point was so important. I wanted to make sure we emphasize.
Yeah, and I think, look, again, I'm coming from a different place, but I think all of us, the thing that you have in common is you're communicating an idea, right? And so, there's different people. If you read like sales books or whatever, there's different people that make decisions based on different factors, right? Kind of like Simon was talking about. There's some people that care more about, like, they want to return on their investment. They want the logic and they want to see the, the numbers. There's other people that like you said, maybe they have a different motivation. And so I think, but bottom line is, like, you're trying to sell this thing. And one thing that I learned over my career, because obviously this is not the first show I've pitched. I've pitched a lot of shows. I've gotten close. I've done, got greenlit for little pilots or whatever, but like this was the one that went to series. And I think part of it too is, a lot of it, quite honestly, is luck and timing, right? And it's persistence. It's sometimes we joke around. It's almost like dating. Like if you ask enough people out or go on enough dates, hopefully eventually you find one that lines up. And it's like that with your project, right? You're trying to go on a bunch of dates, and eventually somebody wants to go on a second date or a third date, right? And I think one of the things that I kind of got in my own way is, like, my background. Obviously, I'm a creative producer, but a lot of this stuff I then have to go into the logistics and execute. And one of the things that I've gotten better at over the years is realizing, like, that some of the things that when I have an idea, and my wife Joelle will tell you this, because I pitch her stuff, and sometimes she's like, God, too much information. A lot of times I will get on my own way where I'm already imagining, like, oh, but here's a problem with the thing. So take this, for example, like this moving dance floor. I'm already thinking about, like, oh, well, it could probably do tilts and up and down, but then to make it spin, I'm already thinking about, like, well, how are we going to manage the cables, and how far can we spin before we got to spin? So sometimes I'm already so down the rabbit hole of problems to solve that my pitch, I might already try to, like, convince them, whoever I'm pitching to, that, oh, but I got this other thing worked out. That's too much information. They're not thinking that many steps ahead. So I think trying to keep it simple, less is more. Like, present your idea in the fun hook kind of way, let them find the problems. answer the problems case by case when they come up, because sometimes you can sort of trip over your own feet, or you start muddying up the pitch or eating up too much time, and their brains aren't ready for that. Again, so really thinking about their the experience of the person who's hearing it for the first time that doesn't know all that you know about it, and trying to keep it simple, general, and then let them ask the follow-ups.
That's
So I have
awesome.
a question, if I may ask both Heath and Simon, because at the film festival we have a lot of filmmakers who come in, and some of the films are just absolutely beautiful. And I've noticed, 2 years later, those films haven't made it to any streaming media. And they're such worthy films. But yet, it's like a paradox. Filmmakers want to do something that they're so passionate about, the story that they're so passionate about. But like Simon said, you also have to understand who your audience is. And I think in many cases, the audience here too are the streaming media, because from what I understand, even in India, and a lot of our filmmakers today are from India listening to you guys. What I understand is even in India, companies like Netflix really don't look at independent indie films. They look for a bit of the Bollywood. And so, where does it leave these filmmakers, and what are the avenues for them to then get onto streaming media? What's the way? I mean, how do they pound the pavement?
Rati, I think actually
Make
one of
their
the other
film.
people who can answer that question is Varun, because Varun's actually been working with Amazon India. He's had conversations with them, and then Simon.
So that was
So
my question
yeah.
to all of you.
Yeah, it's to all of us. So anyone who wants to take it up first is, how can a first-time filmmaker get their stuff seen by a streamer? I think is the easiest way to kind of coach that question. What is those steps? Like, instead of just having done this film and then it's gone nowhere, how do they approach the sales agents? How do they approach the distributors? How do they approach agents for representation? Because maybe that will be the beginning of their journey. Maybe the film doesn't make it in, but they get an amazing agent who then pops their stuff up next. So who wants to take it first?
Well, I'll just jump in real quick. I have a couple of films that are just going through the festivals right now, both first-time filmmakers, and I'm a producer on both of them. In one case, so we're nominated for a couple of awards at the Austin Film Festival, and on the strength of that exposure, and this is a film that did not get into some of the other top-tier festivals, so. It's not like the market only exists within the Sundances of the world. That is certainly the top market in the United States. So we didn't get into Sundance, but we got into Austin, and on the strength of a nomination, I'm getting calls from distributors and sales agents wanting to see the film. So that the festivals are still operating as a marketplace.
Right.
It's not as fervent as it was before COVID, but it still exists. And so I'm reaching out to filmmakers that I've worked with in another capacity as a composer and whatnot, doing my due diligence and looking up who these distributors are and what their catalogs are like, and finding that they have sold films that I've been involved in before. And so reaching out to the filmmakers and asking, well, tell me what that experience was like. And in that conversation, they turned me on to other distributors who they were also talking to. And so using that as a conduit to, okay, maybe I should reach out to those folks as well, because it just, like Heath said, that it very much is like a dating process. And what on paper may look like a great match, even though they swiped right on you, it might not actually be, the best match. So you've got to swipe right on a bunch of folks, and hopefully, but you might not necessarily be directly connected to them. You have to go through all these different channels. I'm about to start working on another film where the filmmaker's last film did not get distribution, and he put it up on Amazon rental, and he was making 6 figures a month on rentals. And this is a film that did not get distribution, but he knew who his audience was. His film was tailored towards a particular subgenre, and he executed really well. He told a story for that genre really well, and it just took off. And so, there's no ultimate solution or ultimate
There's no linear path.
yeah,
There's no one.
yeah, it's there's so many ways to get to where you want to get to, especially now, because theatrical is not that end all be all that it used to be. So streaming through sales agents, through directly to the outlet, and there are a lot of intermediaries now. So you do have to pound the pavement. In terms of your question about agents, I find that they get involved when they have a client that's already involved, typically cast. So if you don't have a cast member who is repped by one of the big agencies and they don't have a sales arm, then it's harder to get to them, because they would rather take 2 bites of the apple rather than 1. So they've gotten the fee from having their client in your film, and now they're going to get a sales fee, and it's just an easier sell, because they're going to package a ton of their films together to these streamers and say, okay, we can give you this entire slate. Again, going back to the slate idea, it's easier for people to buy a bundle. So that's my 2 cents there.
They put you in these lovely buckets where it's like there's at least 2 films with major names in it, and there's about 50 films with people you've seen on TV at some point in your life, and then there's a bunch of films where it's like, we really love it, but we don't have, there's no star power. The story's amazing, but there's 0 star power, but the story's amazing. So they put it in, and now I think it's the filmmaker's job, and anyone can chime in at this point. It's a filmmaker's job to also make sure that you tell everybody and everywhere, you do your own publicity, you do your own marketing, especially if you get into the smaller buckets, where it's like, okay, I've sold it, which is great because you're recouping some money, but how does anyone know where it is?
I've had examples where directors have sold their films to a distributor, and then after a certain amount of time, they've decided to take their film back. They actually had that in their contract because they weren't happy with what the distributor's strategy was. They took it back, and then they devised their own marketing campaign and did much better. So it's never the end all be all. So you have to be ready for that.
Wonderful.
And can I jump in with also? I'm sure everybody who's watching this knows this, but you have to be realistic about what you can do, either as the filmmaker or the producer. You should always be on parallel tracks of, trying to work the system of sales agents, the normal Hollywood system, which is a path unto itself of trying to get those people's attention. But then there's the parallel system of you as the filmmaker or the producer trying to get this movie seen. And you just have to be really realistic about what kind of time and resources that takes, because that can become a full-time job, often unpaid. So that's
if
definitely
anyone's
something.
done Indiegogo, that is a full-time job. Raising money through Indiegogo is a full-time job. Anyone who tells you otherwise, it's like it's the same akin to getting money from elsewhere. It's about marketing, PR, press all day long. Did anyone else want to jump in, Varun or Joelle?
Yeah, no, I can maybe shed some light into the experience of being part of a team, working on an indie film, trying to get distribution. Because again, I haven't wrote or sold anything to any streamers. That's not my that's not. I'm not an originator of new things. All the other people here are wonderful examples of people who originate. But on the tail end of it, like the directors that I've seen be successful in getting some kind of distribution for their film are people who have been thinking, who either as directors themselves or have producing partners who are thinking about how this film is going to be sold right while it's being made, right? So instead of approaching the film as like, this is my life story that I want to tell, which is great, right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but then also realize, like, from the other end, like, okay, we're gonna get loop people in. Like, would you cast somebody who's rep, whose agency can also help you sell the film? So then you start making those kinds of choices early on to say, okay, this person's agent knows that, and that person will be able to sell it. So, and then this distribution company is a small one, but they have done films with this group of people before, with this group of actors. So if we do that, then we have an in over there. So I think strategizing these things early on really is what I've seen lead to success in getting distribution in some form, right? Whether that distribution makes you money is a whole other thing, right? But yeah, really like thinking about how would you get this film in front of people while you're making it. I think that has been super important. Also, like approaching it as like your first feature as your first feature, not your only feature, right? I think that's that having that approach from a director's perspective, I think is very important, because when you treat it as your only feature, then you're like, somebody rejected my baby, how dare you, right? And I think that's and that kind of mindset can get in your way of saying, of not tying up your entire self-worth into every meeting that you take with, trying to sell your film. And then if you treat it as like, okay, this is the first feature of my career, like I will do what best I can given the time and given the circumstances with this. But then it's not about this job, it's the next job, right? It's like saying, okay, here's if you're able to establish a relationship with a distributor or a sales agent or whoever it is, saying that, hey, you know what, this is this is an easy concept to sell horror film that I made for like $1 million. But then this will show you that I can like easily, but on the screen it looks like it's $3 million. So then you're giving them an arbitrage to sell. They'll be like, oh, this is a person who can take something, take a certain amount of money, make it look like a lot more on screen, and then so what they can find returns on is something else entirely. So then you make it a value proposition, and then you're like, oh, now you can, through the sales agent, you might be able to get, you might be able to pre-sell your next film. You might be like, that's where your career has to go.
That is
right?
huge. Yeah, no, this takeaway, guys, is very big, because you all have these amazingly beautiful films. Right now it's COVID, so you can't even travel to the various places where you possibly would be networking, which is going to be the next question that we're going to talk about. But the one big takeaway is, you have made a beautiful film, leverage it on every angle. So leverage it as what Varun just said, which is, I made this movie for $1 million, but when you look at it, you can tell that it looks like an extraordinary film for $5 million, but that's a skill set now that you are selling as a filmmaker. That is so huge for you, because now you can take away and go, look at what I can do. You're not just selling the film, but like you said, you can do a pre-sale on another film that you want to do. So these are huge takeaways that I'm hoping you guys all are writing down. Next up, let's talk about networking. There was a beautiful question by Swati going, how do you network during COVID? I mean, this is absolutely true. Joelle actually has some great tips, and then we will open it up for everybody else to talk about as well.
Yeah, I do a lot of networking. As a writer, you kind of have to. So I do I do a ton of networking through Twitter. I mean, there's something like some of my networking is going on play dates with my daughter, in the past, because we happen to be in a neighborhood with a lot of producers. But if you don't live in LA, you can go through Twitter. There's a lot of Asian and Southeast Asian producers and TV showrunners who are dying to meet new filmmakers. They're dying to meet directors. They're dying to meet writers, and they're dying to meet new producers. I mean, there's agents who are of Southeast Asian descent who want to find, producers like yourselves. You have to find them on Twitter or social media and just interact with them. And at some point they'll follow you. So there's an Asian TV showrunner who just one day wanted to meet more Asian writers. And so he put it out there, hey, if you're an Asian writer, let me know. So I did that. And all of a sudden, we started following each other. And so I could always ask questions. And, I'm not at that point yet where I want to go, hey, let me attach you to my project as a showrunner. you don't do that yet, right? It's the long game. So you want to develop that relationship till you get to that point where, you know, there's another showrunner I met through the WGA who I asked for advice. And then another time I asked for advice. And then, you know, I'd like some of his stuff on social media. And then it got to the point where I went in for a pitch meeting at Netflix and he gave me advice. And then he said, oh, well, you know, if the execs there are the same execs I'm working with, I'll follow up on your project. And so I never asked for that. He just offered it because of the many interactions we've had of me asking for advice, never sending a script, never asking for anything except his advice. And then he felt comfortable enough to then do that for me. So that's how I've done it. I think, and you don't have to be in LA to do that. You just have to be savvy with Twitter, which I'm not even that savvy. So if I can do it, you guys can do it too.
Any other advice on networking?
Yeah, yeah, if I may just add a couple of things. I host a couple of different organizations in New York, but now in the light of COVID, it's opened up remote. So these are networking groups of execs and agents and filmmakers, and everyone's out there to help each other to get further ahead and to share nuggets of information. One of those organizations is HRTS, which stands for the Hollywood Radio Television Society. And there's one in New York, there's one in LA. And it's just been a really great group of people that are, and there are different levels of it depending on where you are in the industry. And then there's a group that I host in New York, which is basically a drinking club for filmmakers. And even though I don't drink, you know, I'm the designated driver for everybody. And even though nobody drives in New York, but it's become this really great group, and there's no reason why you can't do that in your area. And you know, mine spawned out of me wanting to introduce the filmmakers that I worked with to each other over dinner, and I could never get them to agree on a date. And when they did actually come by, it was such a mess of cleaning up dishes and stuff. I figured, you know, I don't want to be cleaning up dishes half the night. So I'm going to invite them all to a bar. It's going to be at this time, this place. And they just showed up, and then they told their friends. And now we're over 2,000 people, invite only. There's no advertising. There's no t-shirts or buttons or anything. It's just this informal group. There's one in New York. There's one in LA. There's one in Miami now. And it's a great group of award-winning and new and filmmakers and creatives. And it's just people sharing their experiences in a very informal way. And just like Joelle said, nobody's pitching. It's not that kind of hang. It's just, hey, we're just asking each other advice and sharing what we love about what we do. And along the way, people will say, I really love what you're doing and what you're about. I'd love to hear what you're working on. I'd love to see how I can help. I mean, one director that I would drag to these events, she met her husband there. You know, that didn't happen. That's a different kind of pitch entirely. But look, you know, that's the kind of stuff that happens, and it opens up the door to lots of really amazing collaborations.
Maida, hold on, Joelle. Maida wanted to say something, and then we'll get to you.
Yeah, I'll amplify the join any group that's affiliated with what you're looking to do or what you're already doing. I mean, as soon as you can join the Producers Guild, join the Producers Guild. You know, any group, because it's just, you're going to find your like-minded folks and the folks who want to help others, and then just really be a good member of that group. I'm a part of a it's called Women in Moving Pictures Google group that was started by Emily Best, who runs Seed and Spark, which is a online sort of Indiegogo-ish platform. And so she has a private networking group that used to meet in person, but it got too big. So now it's on this Google group. And I think it's like 3,000 women. It's for women only. And you know, I just notice when people are good members of that group, and then you also see it's, you know, if you're going to send out a really odd email or a really aggressive email, 3,000 people are going to see it on the posting. So just be a good member of that group too. Follow their rules. You know, that's always, you're putting yourself out there, and people are going to see that. But join.
Wait, Joelle and Maida, I want to just talk to you very quickly about the PGA. I mean, and Simon, you can chime in, but I mean, these two have been running the organization as well. Talk to us about the importance of unions and guilds and stuff like that, just very quickly, because that's the one thing a lot of people don't know. In India, there is a PGA arm, you know, and so in all these countries, what has been the benefits of you being part of a union or a guild?
I mean, for me personally, so I'm in the WGA and the PGA. And I mean, I get so many of my meetings through those two organizations, just through networking, you know, because everyone, being a writer and producer has benefited me on both ends. So, you know, as a writer in the PGA, people want to meet with me because they want to meet new writers. As a producer at the WGA, I'm looking for writers and have access to all the best writers. And so it's been really great. And to just be involved in the different guilds, it's how you get to know people.
Maida, what about you? Because you're DGA and PGA.
Yeah, you know, mine is a little bit different because I came up through DGA as my training, but it's not necessarily where I'm headed in terms of my career. So I work with, I don't work within the organization of the DGA. I also sort of, I really appreciate the diversity of the PGA, the Producers Guild, and the way that they speak to women and they speak to people of who don't always get the opportunities. And I didn't necessarily find that in the DGA. So I moved towards the PGA. It's also where I'm going as my career a little bit more. So that's maybe just also really look at the organization and decide whether that, you know, their mission is really what you support.
No, and that's huge, guys. That actually is a very good point, because these things don't cost like a couple of pennies. They're quite expensive to join and to maintain that. But the one other thing I do want to point out before we go to Vijay's question, which I'm going to throw to Joelle, one of the other things I'm going to say is when you join these guilds, don't be in it for the screeners and don't expect that they're going to come out and help you. You're going to put the work in. And it's the same thing with having an agent or a manager. It's you had to put in that work, you have to pound that pavement, and you have to be, you know, really going towards doing the thing that you want to do. So I enjoyed mentorship, but mentorship truly was a way to also meet some really great people, you know. But I got a mentor. Maida gave me my first mentor, who was amazing, Shannon Galding, who is this immensely huge producer and lovely, who took the time and nurtured me. And she nurtured me in a very bad period of my life because I had been on hiatus. I came back. Mentoring is a huge thing. Find a mentor. We do need to wrap up soon. So, okay, Joelle, go ahead and take the next question from Vijaya. I think it's all about writing. So I think that's up your alley.
Yeah, and it's actually very specific. It sounds like they have a project that you want to write a film about your own story, and where do you start? Well, it's interesting because that's actually how I got into my program, into the Universal Writers Program, and how I became a writer was because I have this very interesting life story that I felt I needed to tell. So I didn't really know what to do, and well, anyway, but I wrote a different script just because it was easy and I couldn't quite figure out my story. And that's how I got into the Universal Writers Program. But now I am actually writing this feature based on my life story. And really the first step is writing it. And if it's a very compelling story, everyone's going to love it. So with me, out of all my projects, my life story is the one that everyone really likes. And I've gotten a lot of people requesting to read the script, including execs at Netflix and Focus and Universal. So, and all the different producers who work with them. So if it's a compelling story, I mean, you just have to write it and then get it out there. It'll find its way. What's that?
The one question I want to ask you is because there are pieces in which for you, you had to get clearances. You had to have the uncomfortable conversations. So maybe talk about that part of writing your own story.
Oh yeah. So the uncomfortable conversations actually with my crazy mom, so who I don't necessarily trust, and the life, and you know, it's a story about me and my mom, and so obviously I had to get her life rights, and so I had to pose it in a way of, hey, sign this, and I promised you Catherine Zeta-Jones will play you, but I'm not going to promise it in the contract. But basically you have to, if your life story is just about you, then it's your life story. But if it involves someone else in your life, like in my instance, it's my mother, I had to get her life rights before moving forward, just because even with family, you can never trust them. Like once there's money on the table, things can change. And so you have to make sure that everything is there. I mean, even with siblings, you guys could be the best of friends, but even with your best friend, right, you have to make those contracts and make sure that you're protected, and then you can move forward and write your story.
Thank you so much. We are going to wrap because we're almost at the end. I want to give a big round of applause to the amazing panelists who have given you a wealth of knowledge from every single area of their lives. Each one of them is in a different discipline, and that's part of the reason we wanted to do this entertainment panel, because it's all entertainment, but the disciplines can, the way that you approach things is very important. And I think each one of them gave you so much information. So thank you, Joelle. Thank you, Varun. Thank you, Maida. Thank you, Simon. And thank you, Heath. Rati, thank you for having us. I hope you guys took a lot of the information away. I know that a lot of people want to sell. I think Varun really hit it out of the park when he said, don't treat it like your child, treat it like your first project that you're going to build from. Every one of them gave you some great advice. Can you guys all put your Twitter tags or Insta tags if you want anyone to follow you? If you want it, if you're not, it's okay too.
Absolutely. I mean, that would be lovely. And I just
also,
want to say,
sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add, thank you guys for being here. This is awesome for our filmmakers, and especially for those filmmakers who are trying to get their projects out. I think it was very eye-opening for them. And thank you, Mita, for giving them information as well that they can look up and get and contact and do things that they need to do. This was lovely. Thank you, Bhavani, for bringing out, for really putting it together and making people think about it, because as people talk, you were really able to bring all those ideas together and express it out for our filmmakers. So I love the way you moderated it. Thank you so much for doing that. And, I feel like we're just learning, and there's just so much more to learn from all of you. And we've just barely scratched the surface. So I do hope you guys come back and come back sometime, and I would love to have more of a conversation with everyone and learn so much more. So thank you, Varun. Thank you, Joelle. Thank you, Mita. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Heath. Thank you,
Welcome.
and
Thank you.
And Bhavani. Go get it,
Joelle.
girl.
So, okay, guys,
I
thank you so much. I hope
you.
all of you follow. Let me put mine on. I actually don't know my own Twitter handle. This is horrible. I just told you all to do it. This is Bhavani 101. And actually, the one thing I have been finding is that Twitter is absolutely much more of the place to do this, because I find that people have been more responsive on Twitter, which is interesting because I'm a Facebook and Instagram girl. Guys, we wish you well. We are excited to see all your films. We're excited for you to meet you when COVID is over. And we are excited to, see all of us rise in the industry. So thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you very much. And we will keep in touch. We have all through COVID, we've been having weekly, panels with the creatives, just trying to understand the story behind the story. And I'm sure we'll do more of those. Thank you, and hope to see you at our festival next year.
Hope to see everybody again soon at some point.
Stay
Bye,
safe.
guys.
Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.